Mute. Okay, we're on.
All right, good morning, everybody. This is Jeremy Grandstaff. I'm the process architect for the Nebraska Walkable Communities project, and I'm really excited to be coming to you live today with Julie and Andy, who are going to be leading a dialogue with us about bike ped committees. And bike ped committees or active living advisory committees, depending on where the city is a really great tool for helping you ensure that there is a governmental body that's helping to push forward things like walking, biking, active livability, like I said, depending on where your city is. And one of the things that we found in doing the work for the Nebraska Walkable Communities project is that these type of committees are a tool that different towns and cities are using in order to advance these efforts. Before I turn it over to Julie and Andy to talk through the topic for today, I want to just take a second to talk about the Nebraska Walkable Communities project. The purpose of the Nebraska Walkable Communities project is to engage 11 plus communities in directly engaging their community members and creating strategic plans to increase walking, biking, and overall health. The second prong of our purpose is to create on-the-ground successes, anything ranging from education to encouragement programs to policy change at the local and hopefully state level. And the third piece of the work for the project is to engage and create a strong steering committee that can help provide support, resources, and technical assistance to our local communities as they are going through the community-driven strategic planning process. So we've got a variety of leaders around the state, some of you who are even on today's call, who are really helping to advance walking, biking, and overall health efforts in the state. And Julie and Andy are two of what I would call our all-stars. So Julie and Andy, I'm really excited that both of you are here today. Julie Harris is the Executive Director for the Nebraska Bicycling Alliance. Bicycle Alliance.
Bicycling, you're good.
Bicycling, I got it. Okay. Nebraska Bicycling Alliance. And we've seen really great things from her organization, and we know that, Julie, your organization is going to actually be partnering with the project next year with the Nebraska Walkable Communities Project next year to work on hosting a bike walk summit. And so I want people to keep that in the back of your mind, and we'll be obviously releasing more information about that probably this fall. And then Andy Wessel. Andy, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on your title.
I'm a community health planner.
I should have known that. I've been working with Andy since 2013 when we did the first walkability workshop for America Walks in Omaha. And Andy is just, I really love the way that you approach change and cultural change, and really look at how you bring people into that process. And I think that even some of the stuff that you've done with there in Omaha is a really great example of that. It's stuff that you and Julie have done with the committee in Omaha there. So looking forward to hearing from them, and I, of course, will give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. I also wanted to take just a moment to say that we are also being joined today by Brian Coyle. Brian is the main contact for the Nebraska. Wave to everybody.
I do.
There you go. Beautiful. I love it. But Brian is our main client on this particular project and is the main contact for the Nebraska Walkable Communities project here at the Department of Health and Human Services. And I just want to give a big thank you to you, Brian, and the rest of your staff and leadership that has really helped to propel this project to the next level. So we're glad you're able to join us today. Just because we have the camera going, we have a couple different things going on, and so you you may see one of us step out for the moment. This is really Julie and Andy who are leading this conversation, and so without further ado, I want to turn it over to Julie and Andy. They're going to walk us through some stuff that has to do with bike ped committees, active living advisory committees, and then there'll be time for Q&A. So if you have questions along the way, you can always put those into the chat box at the bottom of your screen. You can also raise your hand, and Julie is able to unmute you and bring you in for the Q&A as well. Is there any other things I should have covered, Julie, before I turn it over?
No, I think you're good.
All right. Well, once again,
you should mention that it's being recorded.
What'd you say?
You should mention that the broadcast is being recorded.
Yes, thank you, Andy. So we are recording the webinar. It is not so that we can turn it into the intelligence agencies and tell on you or anything like that. It's more that we want to be able to share the great discussion that we're going to have today in the Q&A with other health departments and environmental people and anyone who wants to find out more about how bike ped or active living advisory committees can help take your work to the next level. So just know that this call is being recorded. And without further ado, I will ask everybody to give a huge round of applause to Julie and Andy.
Woo! I might move the webcam because when I was sitting like this, I feel like it's slow jamming the news on Jimmy Fallon when he's sitting behind me like this. So maybe I'll see if I can adjust this just a little so it's not quite so slow jam the news-ish. And then you guys can do what you need to do out there. How's that look, Andy?
Not bad.
Not bad?
We're still getting Brian, but we're good.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you. I'm Julie Harris, as Jeremy mentioned. I'm the Executive Director of the Nebraska Bicycling Alliance. I have also been, for the last, starting about 9 years ago now, I guess, part of the Bike Ped Advisory Committee that sort of morphed into a few different things with the City of Omaha, so kind of have a perspective on that, and really glad to have Andy with us. And Andy can kind of tell you a little bit more about what he does and how he fits into this picture.
Thanks, Julie. So I work at the Douglas County Health Department. I'm a community health planner. What in the world does that mean? Sort of the best way to understand what I do is just that there are decisions that get made in sort of like areas like transportation and housing and real estate development that really, shape a city and often shape it for decades to come. And so the way we shape our city then has impacts on our health, like how much we are going to walk, how physically active we are going to be, what kind of air quality we have, how much we socialize, all of those sort of things. So Richard Jackson has a really great phrase for it. He basically says decisions like this are, putting health policy in concrete. And so that's really what I do is work with a lot of different partners, but in particular the City of Omaha, around those decisions they've got to make and how they shape our city. And so that's sort of the main part of what I do, but then I've been involved along with Julie with both the Bike Ped Advisory Committee that Omaha had in place before, and now the Active Living Advisory Committee. And so we'll share the Omaha experience, both the good, bad, and the ugly of all of that, as well as hopefully make sure that we're really not just sharing something that's relevant to Omaha, but to people from across the state. So that's what we're really going to try to shoot for.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that too that it's really important to understand that although we will be speaking specifically about what happened in Omaha, these committees are a good tool that can be used in any size of community, and certainly the issues that we have found and we've worked through are issues that are not big city issues necessarily, but are really interpersonal and communication and structural issues. And so, don't let the Omaha factor sort of blind you to what we're talking about, because they really are pretty universal things that we're going to be talking about today. Quickly, I think I have a next slide. There we go. So here's our agenda for the day. The hour. We've already done welcome. We did introductions. We're going to get into just some real general information about what these types of committees are and different options for these types of committees. And then Andy and I will get into sort of Omaha's journey in this whole thing, and then we'll leave plenty of time for Q&A. As Jeremy mentioned, just feel free to raise your hand on the little toolkit box thing there on the side, or type it into the chat box, and we'll be good to go. And in terms of format, Andy and I are going to be kind of tag teaming today, not any necessarily real formal structure, just sort of chiming in as needed, so it'll be pretty informal, so feel free to ask any questions that you have and we'll be sure to get to them. When we were putting together these slides, it occurred to me that somebody else had done this before us and done a very good job at it, so instead of recreating the wheel, I went right back to the experts. And the folks from the Alliance for Biking and Walking a few years ago, through their Advocacy Advance project, put together this really great resource that you can still find online if you search the Alliance for Biking and Walking. And it really goes into really great detail on bicycle and pedestrian advocacy committees and what they are and what they do. And I kind of took a lot of this first part from them, and if you want more information, you can certainly go back to that report that's online. But basically, a bicycle pedestrian advisory committee, or whatever you want to call it in your city or town, provides guidance to elected officials and other decision makers who are making decisions about bicycle and pedestrian and active living issues in your community. And it gives citizens and people, advocates, the opportunity to be a part of the decision-making process to make sure that certain things are considered and not forgotten. It's a really great tool to support your local officials and your local decision makers as well, and it's something that can be done in any size town. In terms of what makes a good committee, there's some things that make a really great committee, and then some things that committees can sort of fall into that are not as productive. And I've listed some of those here. And again, these are from the Alliance for Biking and Walking. These bicycle pedestrian advocacy committees, I think Lincoln calls theirs the Pedestrian Bicycle Advocacy Committee, and I think Barb Fraser's on the line. She can confirm that for me. PBAC or something. Anyway, they act as a check for elected officials and agency staff. They expect that the committees expect presentations and chances to give input to agency staff, to city elected officials on major projects that are happening. The committees provide constructive guidance on bicycle and pedestrian issues, and they ensure that residents have an opportunity to give input and receive a response. And that's something that we really have found in Omaha that's a big part of what we're doing, is that people who really care about bicycling and pedestrian issues really want to know that their voices are heard. A lot of times, with the majority of people driving cars and maybe very few walking and biking, a lot of times people feel like those issues are not heard or glossed over or ignored, and so this provides an opportunity for that to make sure that those issues are heard. In terms of the things that can be a pitfall for these committees, and Andy and I have seen this happen in one way or another throughout the years, these types of committees do not and should not endorse candidates for local offices or others. Obviously, as individuals, you can do what you need to do, but as a committee, it's not advisable, nor should you go so far as to endorse certain candidates or elected officials. It's very easy to fall into the trap of getting focused on one or two committee members' pet projects or pet causes, and I think Andy and I can share a little bit about that. A lot of times, if you get a really strong personality in your group and perhaps a facilitator that's not as strong at handling those types of personalities, it can start to become all about that one or two person's favorite project, favorite bike lane, favorite trail, whatever it is, and that kind of will lead to the downfall if you're not careful. And it's also important to, that a good committee does not lose sight of the big picture. In other words, making sure in the long haul that facilities and engineering and all of these things are updated and keeping, projects moving forward, as opposed to, smaller things like updating a bike map. Those things, updating a bike map is a great thing to do, but don't lose sight of the bigger picture. Don't get so bogged down in some of the minutia that you lose sight of really the bigger picture of what your committee is working on. Andy, do you have anything you wanted to add to that conversation?
No, I'll save my comments about some of the details of the do's and don'ts here later.
Got it. Okay, there's several different ways that you can structure your committee, and obviously this will depend on the size of your city, the makeup of your group, the goals that you have, how involved your elected officials, your mayor or city administrator or whomever want to be, and it also impacts the influence that your committee will have. The first type of group that you could form is sort of an independent group or commission. Many communities have a variety of these types of boards or communities that advise the city council or the mayor, whether it's the Disabilities Commission, or in Omaha's case we are now an independent group, the Active Living Advisory Committee. This is a group that is done more formally. It's done via a resolution to your city council or via an executive order. It's something that usually involves the members of the committee being nominated or selected by an elected official, and it's a much more formal way to do it. It also sort of ensures that committee can sort of live on. So if it's part of a mandate or a resolution from a city council, then that if you have a current mayor that's very passionate about these issues, moves on and you get a new mayor that perhaps is not as passionate, that you've structured it so that the committee remains in place and can move forward. Another option is to create the committee as a subcommittee of an existing group. So if your city has already set up some sort of independent group that focuses on transportation issues at large, whether that's through your planning agency or your planning department or your county or however that works, perhaps then there's a subcommittee of that group that can focus especially on bicycle and pedestrian issues. And then the third group is sort of a mayoral advisory group, and I guess in Omaha we're kind of a hybrid of these two things. But a mayoral advisory group is something that a group that provides expert advice and guidance to the mayor or the city council president or whomever is empowered to make those types of decisions. Again, that's if you don't include a resolution or executive order with that, then you run the risk of not having a sustainable plan, but it is a good way to make sure that communication goes directly to the decision makers that do make a difference, and you avoid the trap of just being people sitting around a table talking about what's great about biking and walking and your latest great bike ride you did last weekend and whatever, but rather that you're actually working with your elected officials and making sure that communication happens and that there's good feedback happening for projects that need to move forward. Real quick, I just wanted to share this great graphic that was in the Alliance for Biking and Walking report, and it kind of delineates sort of the different roles that some groups can play in your community, and larger communities will have more of these than smaller communities, but it's a good way to sort of see what the difference is. Obviously, we've just gone through what the role of a bike ped advisory committee is. It's more of a higher level that really empowers citizens to impact local decisions. That's different than a bicycle advocacy group, which is separate from and not associated with your local government or whomever you structure that with. It's a community group that advocates for improved biking or walking conditions. They're more like coalitions. They're more loosely tied, and they can definitely have a stronger, more aggressive voice, I think, in a lot of cases. that might need to push issues a little bit more aggressively than an official bike ped advisory committee could push. And then a bicycle club is something, again, that's a third thing that's totally different as well, and it's more of a community group. It's more recreational. It's not necessarily an advocacy-based group, but more of a enthusiast, bicycle or walking enthusiast group. And again, I'm using bicycle in these examples, but definitely walking could be interchanged with any of these as well. So it's definitely, as we move down that list, it's definitely a little bit looser as you go down the list, and they each can play a role and should play a role in your community in these bicycle and walking decisions, but they're not necessarily all the same things. And if you try to sort of combine all of those different objectives into one, you will not be as successful as if you can get people separated and pushing their own agendas forward in their own manner. Andy, I don't know if you have anything you want to chime in there, but that's definitely an Omaha phenomenon in terms of having those.
We have those different groups. Yeah, absolutely. I would say that one of the things that's actually really helpful about having, an advisory committee is that it can sometimes, at least in the case of Omaha, where you have a large number of groups, it can be a challenge for your transportation engineers, your elected officials to sort of, sometimes they feel like they're bombarded by a lot of different voices, and so it's nice for them to have a committee that they can go back to and have a discussion and help them sort of filter out what they're hearing from constituents and from advocacy groups and things like that. So that's one of the benefits, is like, instead of people having to, hear from, a ton of different people, they can actually just have sort of again, that group acting in an advisory capacity for them.
Okay. Next.
And Julie, while you're switching slides, this is Jeremy again, I'll just remind people, if you have questions along the way, you can put those questions into the chat box, and we'll definitely make sure that we get that. And then there will be a Q&A at the end, so if you think of something and you want to make sure we don't forget you, you can always raise your hand. This is really great stuff. I'll hand it back to you, Julie.
All right, thanks. Okay, so the Omaha story is an interesting one, and we have learned a lot of lessons the hard way. We have learned, we could have used, Andy, I think we could have used that Advocacy Advance report a long time ago and saved ourselves a lot of heartache along the way, but it's been definitely a good learning experience for us, and we'll try to sort of explain the evolution, if you will, of Omaha's Bike Ped Advisory Committee, BPAC to ALAC, as we call it. We started out, Jeremy likes that name, as the Bike Ped Advisory Committee, and have morphed more recently into the Active Living Advisory Committee, and we'll kind of tell you how we got from point B to point A, as it were. About 12 years ago or so, 10 years ago, Omaha was really working hard to try to create more bikeability in our community. We had at that point a half of a mile of a very poorly designed bike lane in our city, and there was a group coming together that really wanted to make sure that our city moved forward in terms of being more bicycle friendly. We had a mayor that was very friendly to that idea. He was extremely supportive. It was definitely, he was a former public works director and definitely wanted to see this move forward. So everything, the timing was really great for us in terms of trying to get everything aligned and create a committee that could advise the city on becoming a more bikeable, more bike-friendly city. So the Bicycle Pedestrian Advocacy Committee was formed. Obviously, we chose to be more than just biking, also adding pedestrian in there. But one of the pitfalls that we described earlier was trying to avoid an all-or-nothing mentality, and it really, the walking, the pedestrian part sort of took a back seat from the beginning to the biking part, which was our first sort of issue that we dealt with. But we came together to try to create a network of bicycle routes in Omaha that could be eventually striped, have signage included, get maps together, all of those good things that we could create. And it was called the 20-mile bike loop. We secured about $600,000 of private funding. Live Well Omaha and others in our community came together to do some fundraising to create this, to get the money, because the city didn't necessarily have the money in the budget to create this. And the committee came together and really started working hard at creating this bike network. And in the beginning, the members of the committee were asked by the mayor. They were formally invited to join. There was somebody from the mayor's office that started attending the first few meetings. And, you know, in the beginning, there was a lot of excitement and a lot of good work being done. And then, Andy, do you want to jump in and sort of talk about sort of how the slow, gradual decline started to happen?
You know, at the end of the day, you really have to create a meeting that people are going to be excited to go to and where they feel like good things are getting accomplished. And that was sort of what got lost. What ended up sort of being this thing about, you know, really advising sort of public policies and key projects, including the 20-mile loop, ended up basically becoming sort of a report out on all the different things that different agencies were doing. So we would go there, gather, and it'd be just sort of around the table of updates. And for those of you who have sat in that kind of meeting where it's just an update sort of meeting, they're not particularly engaging, they're not particularly exciting. And so that was a big challenge. And part of it was then we would often jump into a project, a particular thing where, you know, we were talking about a new bike lane going in or whatever. And some people who were more the design professionals would go straight into the weeds of like, well, what should the width be here and all of this, and like what kind of paint should we use? Should we use paint or should we use tape? And all of those sort of details that really were in the weeds for a lot of the people around the table, because many people around the table weren't architects or engineers. You know, they were people who cared about this, but cared about it, like in my case, from a health perspective, and didn't have much to comment on that. So it ended up being a conversation between the three people who had that level of technical expertise. So that was another don't. So what Julie talked about of it just becoming sort of a conversation about just bike issues is a don't. Having it just be a report out meeting is a don't, and having it get so far in the weed with technical issues that most of the people can't really participate effectively at that point is another thing to be careful of. And so all that gets into part of why this has been changed to the Active Living Advisory Committee, because the intent was not to make this just a bicycling discussion, but to really make sure that this was about sort of a broader vision for our community in terms of being, you know, a place where we were an active community, where we had employees who were healthy, where we had places that were vibrant, where we had a transit system that was working well, in addition to the walking, biking pieces. It also let us talk about trails and recreation, which was something that a lot of people cared about, because you'll notice from that map that Julie showed a lot of the things where you have to put in on-street facilities, so where you're actually paving the road, is a case of where you've already built up. But on the edges of Omaha, you could put in trails. You had room and hadn't developed. So by talking about trails and issues like that, we made it so that it was much more an issue for the whole community rather than seen as just something for people who are strong bike advocates.
Yeah, I'd also add that that towards the end, because we would get into the weeds so much, we were almost setting ourselves up for conflict at every meeting. So, you know, there were some very strong bicycle advocate types in the room who really wanted, you know, things to happen right now, and they wanted big things to happen right now. And then we had some city staff that, you know, had different ideas of how things should go, where things should go, what they should look like. And so when we would start to get into the weeds, there were often some pretty uncomfortable conversations that really digressed and took us away from our mission. And created some real personality conflicts almost, which led to people not coming to the meetings, people getting frustrated, and as you can see in this slide, it's, why are we doing this again? And before you knew it, there was hardly anyone around the table. No, there were really no meeting minutes being taken. It had just digressed into that one meeting on your calendar every month that everyone dreaded and tried to find a way to get out of. Not helpful at all. It really devolved to a point where when that mayor then left office and we got a new mayor, that there was a lot of tension in the community. There was a lot of discontent, a lot of frustration, and we knew that some things needed to change. There was some shakeup in the city staff after we got the new mayor, as is pretty typical when new mayors come to town or come into office, and thankfully the new mayor had some good people advising her, and we became the Active Living Advisory Committee. Oops, go back here. Sorry. And we sort of, with this new mayor, sort of started from scratch, and we were able to go in and formally create this committee. It was a formally created committee from an executive order, which we didn't have before. I think I neglected to mention that even though the mayor had set it up before, there was never anything formal that had gone into the city, the minutes or through the city council, and so there was, it was very unstable. With this new committee that started about 2 years ago now, Andy, almost, it was a formal thing that was through a mayoral proclamation. The mayor took it very seriously and took the time to review official applications, and the mayor appointed everyone that came onto the committee. And then she also, selected key city staff that also needed to be a part of the committee. And as you can see in this, on this slide, our purpose from that executive order to provide a forum for community collaboration and input to the City of Omaha Planning, Public Works, Parks and Rec departments, the mayor and city leadership, and officials about active living, community development, and design principles. So that verbiage was chosen to make sure that we kept that broad perspective in our conversations, and that we didn't just stick as a bicycle committee, but rather we looked at, as Andy mentioned, bicycling, walking, recreation, trails, all of the things that go into active living. Transit in Omaha's case, making sure people can get to and from public transit was a big part of it. So really broadened our focus and really solidified the perspective of each person, why they were there, their terms, their bylaws. It was a very formal thing that was set up.
And I'll add that piece of, like, we had committee members around the table before. We had staff from key departments around the table before, but it became a very different thing when they were specifically asked by the mayor to be part of this committee and to be sort of the liaison for that department being involved, and making sure that, again, that the right people were from those departments were there, that to a large degree we have people who are in really a strong position to be able to shape some of the work that their department does. And so that's a critical thing. Like, you can have the group that's just sort of the committee members sitting around who are, appointed by the mayor, but if you don't have any of the staff, the people who are actually going to be implementing those decisions and who have key information you need, your effectiveness is going to be, much diminished from having those people be able to be at the table.
And I think that it was important for us in this new version of our committee to sort of take some time to repair those relationships that became a little fractured in the last iteration of the committee, and make sure that that we let the city staff know that we wanted to find ways to support them in the decisions they were going to be making, and find out ways that we could make their jobs better as they work on these active living issues for us. And so it wasn't just about what projects can we do to improve active living, but rather what can we do to make the process better and easier for the staff that's going to be putting this into practice. Go ahead.
one of the things that we've had city staff say to us candidly is that anytime they do something new, anytime they do something innovative, it's a change from the status quo, and some people will be unhappy with any change from the status quo. So many times they want to do new things, they want to innovate, but they actually need support to be able to do that. They need people who are going to have their back and say, you know, actually we've sat down, we've looked at this makes a lot of sense, here's why. And it's not just, as many of us know, like there's not a whole lot of trust for government right now, and so sometimes you need a group like the Active Living Advisory Committee to be other folks to say, hey, look, we're overseeing this, we're helping double check this and make sure this all makes sense, and we think it's a good idea. And that actually can do a lot for helping sort of repair relationships between, you know, staff members and then community members.
We, from the beginning, I don't know why that first part isn't showing up there. From the beginning, we were very anxious to be very transparent about what our goals were, about what our objectives were, about how we were going about doing things. We wanted to make sure that all of our minutes and our agendas were posted online. That was something that was not done before. Make sure that anybody in the community that wanted to know what was happening with the Active Living Advisory Committee could see it and see what our recommendations were. And so after we got everyone sort of selected and brought on board and kind of got the nuts and bolts of the bylaws and such put together, Andy, who is a fantastic facilitator, led us through a really great and really in-depth goal-setting process. And we, as a group, came up and spent several meetings, because we only meet once a month for about an hour and a half, spent several meetings going through several different steps, almost a strategic planning process, to come up with what our goals would be for the group. And you can see them here, and unfortunately that first goal is a little bit cut off, but it's basically to increase engagement between the public and the city on active living issues, to establish regular communication with city leadership, to assist city policy implementation around complete streets and other issues there, and then to develop an annual active living progress report to really show accountability, so we can publish and say, look, we know that, you know, our baseline data showed that we had X number of crashes involving bicycles, or X number of crashes involving pedestrians, or whatever the different measures are. And, you know, we wanted to collect that baseline data and then start to work towards making it better and making sure that we reported annually about what those measures are and how things were working. It's been a real great way for us to stay on track. It's been a great way for us to stay away from the coming and reporting out about what the latest thing is on the trail that's getting built that moved forward an inch from the last meeting. But really, so it really gives us that that roadmap to stay focused and to make sure that when something comes to our attention, we can refer back and say, is this really something that our group needs to be dealing with? And if not, we need to figure out where it needs to live. But if it is, then it's something that we need to take on and really move it forward. I think a good example of this is something that we just have been covering within our last couple of meetings. There was a couple of school kids that were hit right towards the end of the school year in an intersection not far from a school, and it came out that the pedestrian, the buttons to stop the traffic were damaged in a recent storm and were not working. And so this was an opportunity for our group to say, look, this is something that's come up in the news. Maybe not all of our pedestrian buttons are working. What are we going to do about this? What can we do? Let's talk to Public Works and find out, how do they maintain the signals? How often are they checked? What can we do to help them make sure that when school starts again, that we've got them all up and running and have tried to check as many as we can? How can we partner? Who else can we bring in to do this? So you know, that kind of back and forth, we kind of came up with a pretty good plan that the City Public Works really thought was going to be helpful. We're going to bring in somebody from the police department to our next meeting to chat more about this, bring in somebody from the school district to find out what their perspective is, and then come up with a plan to move it forward. So that's just one example of a recent project that's come to our attention about an active living issue and a safety issue that we can coalesce and bring everybody together and try to solve the issue. Andy, anything else you want to add on that, on the goal setting or the process we went through?
Just, I would say there's a really critical piece. I love the expression, like, progress happens at the speed of trust, and that was what we didn't really have, and we're still struggling as a community to get that. But you don't get to trust until people are on the same page, where they have shared understanding. I understand where you're coming from, you understand where I'm coming from, and you really have to have the time and space for communication to be able to get to that shared understanding. And that's what, you know, going through that process of talking through what our goals should be really helped create, is that, you know, by the time we were done, people were on the same page. And so it's been nice to have people, like, we'll start going astray and people will refer back to the goals that we established and bring us back on track. And so it's not just one chair with their personal vision having to do that, like the group itself has that, and so we can kind of keep ourselves on track. So I think that's an important part, is to actually, like, work through that point where everybody's coming with their individual agendas, their individual perspectives, and get on the same page, and that time is invaluable in terms of saving your conflict and confusion moving forward. Because the issues itself will have enough controversy. You don't want your process to have built-in controversy or built-in, you know, discord and dysfunction already.
All right. We're now up to the question and answer time, but I think before that I just wanted to add one more thing, and that is, and maybe Andy, I'll give you a second to kind of think about this, in terms of the key lessons that we've learned, that if we had advice to give to you all as you are setting up a committee, what advice would we have for you based on all of the tough lessons that we've learned along the way in Omaha over the last 10 years or so. And I think that, and Andy, I'll have you go next, but I think the advice I would give is, number one, make sure that there really is effective communication between the committee that you set up and the mayor or city administrator or whoever is making the decisions. Make sure there really is two-way communication going on between the committee and those decision makers. Make sure that you keep focused on active living. Make sure that the pedestrian issues don't get overshadowed by the bicycle advocates that might be super excited, and I'm the bicycle advocate in the group, but make sure that the pedestrian issues don't take a back seat. Make sure that that they get equal time at the table, and make sure that you've got those goals that you can refer back to that will keep you on track, because it's really easy, as we mentioned in that one of those early slides, to get sidetracked on somebody's personal project or somebody's favorite bike ride or somebody's one intersection that's right by their house that they wish was different. You have to be able to keep that global focus, and those goals will help you to be able to do that. Andy, any other good nuggets of advice before we open it up for questions?
I think you have to really, like, do a lot of work to make sure that you're relevant, that people understand what are the values of this work and why you're pushing for it. Because what I will say, in this day and age, everybody is so busy that unless there are people who are championing particular change, it doesn't happen. And the change that we really push for by talking about active living is yes, we want people to get out and walk more and bike more and all of that, but it's also really about the vision that we have for a city. And the way I explain this, and if you haven't seen it, Strong Towns is an organization, has a really good blog where they talk about this. Is the difference between roads and streets, and roads being the places that get us from point A to point B. So an interstate, a highway, that's designed for high speed, not too many conflicts. You just go fast. And But a street is a very different thing. A street is actually the destination. It's where we slow down. It's where we shop. It's where we come together and people watch. You know, it's that place where that really makes a city vibrant and amazing. And the key is to help a lot of times people who have been focused on providing really good mobility, that getting from point A to point B, that road function, to help balance that with the need to actually provide great places in your city. And having a discussion about walkability, bikeability, livability, all of those sort of terms really ultimately boils down to how do we balance that getting around the place we live with actually having places that are worth going to, places that we care about and we want to spend time in. And if you help people realize that it's about how vibrant the place they live is, including the safety for people, that actually in a lot of ways opens the door to a more richer conversation, and it's a both and conversation rather than an either or one that unfortunately often happens.
All right, we've got some questions in the question box here. Did you want to say something, Jeremy?
Yeah, so first of all, I just want to give another shout out to Julie and Andy, and I want to say, again, get those questions in the question box. We're going to come to those. I was actually hoping that you guys might permit me to start the Q&A with a question, if that's all right, Julie.
Go for it.
And this is a question that I've been getting a lot, even just across the country, not just here in Nebraska. So you talked a lot about strategy, and I wanted to reinforce that piece because I think it really helps you guys stay structured as a committee and making sure that you can report where you're going. When do I want a committee, a bike ped or an active living advisory committee versus an organization? And that's something that we've even got a couple communities in Nebraska that are asking that question. When do I want the full-fledged advocacy organization as opposed to the committee? And some of the questions that I've even got is, wasn't the committee just a way to convince the people to do what the city wants them to do? And so I was wondering if you could just offer a little bit more clarity on that before you go to the other questions.
Yeah, I'll go back to the slide that kind of talked about the difference between those. And I think I don't think there's necessarily, and Andy, jump in, a good one before the other or chicken and the egg kind of a thing. I think it probably depends on, you know, where your community is and who is at the table. Definitely having a formal committee for the city and an advocacy committee kind of, or an advocacy group, sort of, Jeremy, what you're talking about, having those two different voices is actually very helpful because, as I mentioned before, the advocacy group can be a little bit more assertive and say, hey, you know, city of wherever, you said you were going to do this and that, you haven't done it yet, or you didn't do it the way we were hoping. I mean, they can be more aggressive versus the committee that can't really go quite that far, but rather can try to focus on the process on the internal. I think both are important. Andy, do you have a perspective on one versus the other, or if you were going to set up one first?
Some of that goes back to the personality of who's involved and where they fit. I mean, there are some people who their personality is such that they know they're right and they really believe this is important and they want to push. And then there are other people, and I put myself in this category, having done a fair bit of facilitation work, who is sees the two sides in conflict and want to figure out a way for really to still move forward for both the values that both groups are sort of holding to and holding dear, to move forward and find a shared solution for those. And so the committee's more the finding the middle ground, finding the shared solution, which typically comes between bike ped advocates and usually transportation engineers. That's often where the tension is. But if you have a group of people who are really the ones who want to push and change things and all of that, then they're probably going to be more comfortable for the most part being in more of an advocacy group.
Thank you guys for indulging me. I appreciate that because I literally have gotten that question 6 times from across the whole country. So,
well, and
so
Jeremy,
you have
the
other
other part
questions, and just to let you guys know, we've got about probably
11 minutes.
11 minutes. Just save me the last minute for a quick wrap up and promotion of other webinars.
Awesome. Okay, our first question: does Omaha have a bike ped master plan? If so, is the city lead organization that is responsible for implementing the plan, or is it more public-private partnerships?
I'm talking about June 30th.
You or me, Julie?
Go for it, Andy. I'm scrolling down a little bit more here.
Yeah. So what Omaha doesn't have a bike ped plan at the city level because a lot of work got put into actually doing the transportation master plan, the transportation element of our master plan, and really building a lot of bike ped pieces into that. So the city of Omaha has that transportation element of the master plan, plus we also now have a complete streets policy. There is, though, a regional bike ped plan that actually does a lot more of the like nuts and bolts in terms of here when this particular area near the University of Nebraska Med Center redevelops, here's where you should put in a trail. And what the work that's going on right now is actually the city making sure that as they are implementing the complete streets policy that they're taking into account the regional bike ped plan that was developed.
And Julie, who did that question come
That
from?
came from Nikki in Grand Island. So in Grand Island's case then, since you now have an MPO, a planning organization, you know, that's sort of that third leg of the stool, if you will, that's now a newer part of your community. But I think that the Bike Ped Advisory Committee then can provide the communication role between what's happening with developing that plan and implementing that plan and the citizens and the advocates that want to know more and want to be involved and know what's happening. We have a question about, does Omaha have someone from the mayor's office in attendance? Yes, and that's a change from the former committee, although we did have somebody from the mayor's office that in the beginning sort of showed up most of the time, but then after a while just kind of had other commitments and didn't show up anymore. But we do have somebody, we had a deputy chief of staff for a little bit, and now we have somebody from the communications department that attends every meeting and can report back to the mayor anything that she learned that was important. But all of our minutes, all of our information goes directly to the mayor as well. And then if there are specific recommendations that the committee wants to make, we make sure that we make them in a very formal manner, and we send them directly to the mayor herself or to the city council or whomever they need to go to. But we definitely do have those people in the room. That was asked by Barb Frazier in Lincoln. Okay, Amy from Grand Island, what do you recommend for the first steps for a brand new Bike Ped Advisory Committee, just as starting as a group?
So Grand Island, actually, if it's okay, Grand Island has, as part of their work at the community level, decided that they wanted to establish their Bike Ped Committee at the MPO level or city level to make that happen. And so that's what's driving that question. So I just wanted to recognize that is a success just from the Nebraska Walkable Communities Project in general. So hats off to Grand Island for that first step. Where do they go from here?
Yeah, I think it's important that it becomes a formal part of the city. And so Grand Island, maybe the best thing to do is to figure out where are those other commissions or committees that live within the city of Grand Island officially, figure out how did they come to be, what sort of action do you need, official action, to make sure that that committee is established, and then what are the requirements? Do you need bylaws? Do you need people to be nominated or appointed, or how does that work? I think starting out, making sure that you do it right with making sure it's formally as part of the city is important. And then I think Grand Island is also definitely off and running in terms of the steering committee for the work you're doing for the Walkabilities Project, working with the MPO and finding those people that are around the table and seeing who else might need to be around the table and putting the committee together that way.
And I will add, this is cheap advice, but get a good chair, because Julie's the chair of the Active Living Advisory Committee, and what I mean by that is there's a good bit of work that goes on behind the scenes, sometimes tough conversations with the mayor, which I know Julie has had the joy of getting to actually do. And so you need somebody who, to go back to Jeremy's point earlier about, like, is this just going to be, this group that just sort of rolls over and does what the city. You need people who care deeply about this issue, and you need a chair who cares about it, but also can, like, work well, like, with people from diverse perspectives. And so that's a really important point, to make sure you've got a good person in the chair spot, and then that I would argue that you do some actual planning work to figure out what are we going to focus on.
Thanks, Andy.
Yep.
Okay, Ken asks, what was the Omaha committee involved in fundraising efforts? For the 20-mile loop, I'm assuming, and no, we were not. It was Live Well Omaha was the nonprofit that was sort of behind the scenes doing the fundraising for that, and the committee sort of appeared or was formed in conjunction with that work, but not as a part of that work.
So I'm going to ask a piggyback question on that, actually, only because you brought it up, and believe it or not, I don't actually know this. Is Live Well Omaha a member of that community? Because Live Well Omaha is kind of one of your advocacy organizations, is how I would say that. Mm-hmm. And do they participate on that on the Active Living Advisory Committee as well?
Well, so I actually worked for Live Well Omaha when I was selected by the mayor to be the chair initially of the new committee. Okay. So yes, initially, but since I have now switched to become part of the Nebraska Bicycling Alliance, mm-hmm. Andy, I don't think, well, we have Ben Turner with Heartland Bike Share as part of the committee, and he sort of, although his role is transitioning as well, so.
But I've even noticed part of what you guys do at the committee level is to look at how are the advocacy organizations engaged in that conversation as well. And so I just want to put a plug in there for you guys that is something that it seems like you pay attention to and are cognizant of.
Yeah. Thank you.
Julie, we've got time for one or two more questions.
Okay, let's see. Just to comment, the MPO level approach, helpful in that Lincoln facing some planning issues where city-state needed to be cooperating together on some projects. Maybe the MPO can help facilitate that. Oh, thanks, Barb. So that's Barb from Lincoln. So I think that's good advice for Grand Island, since you now have an MPO, that there's, there are some new coordination issues that are going to start to happen now that you have this extra layer happening with projects. So that's good advice from Barb. And then I think that was the last question. That's the last question in the question box. Does anybody else have anything they want to raise their hand or stick another question there? Now is the time. All right.
So I would say just, again, another big thanks and round of applause, if you would, please, for Julie and Andy. And I just really appreciate all of their support, both as steering committee members, partners at the local level, partners at the state level, and making this happen. And again, a big thanks to you, Brian, for being able to join us today and for really putting your commitment and and DHHS's commitment behind and to this project. You guys are doing some phenomenal things both at the statewide and local level, and it's one of the few projects that I've been able to find across the states and actually in Canada even that's really driving things based on what the local community members want and need. And so I really want to say a big recognition to Nebraska for that. This is the first of our virtual training that's going to be happening over the next weeks. And so if you are unable to find the upcoming webinars that will be happening, just email us and we can get that information. We'll also make sure we put it into the follow-up email for attendees. Please tell your friends. I'd love to be able to get newer voices and newer perspectives into these conversations. Some of our upcoming webinars on June 30th is the next one, and it'll be talking, it's actually the same time, I believe. I have to double check that, but June 30th we'll be talking about master plans. There was even a couple questions about master plans today, so we'll be getting into those with Julie and Derek from Omaha, and then Chris Danley is going to also be joining us. He's one of our upcoming panelists there. In July, we're going to have a two-part series on fundraising. The first is kind of the how to plug into existing funding structures. That'll be a webinar, and then in late July, we're going to have what's called a Maestro Conference, and that really gives you guys the opportunity to dive in, do some small group work on creatively solving those funding issues. And so how do we take the existing funding and get more funding for the projects that we're working on? Just in case you're interested, in Sydney in 2 days, I think it's just a little under 2 days, right, Brian? We're going to be hosting the second of 2 Complete Streets trainings, which is a way to explain the concept of Complete Streets and how they can help to increase economic benefit or provide economic benefit for your community. So if you'd like to get information about that and you want to get your boss to let you have a day out of the office to come to Sydney, we'd love to have you visit the Panhandle. You can find more information about that at completestreetsydney.eventbrite.com. And again, if you need any more of these resources, just drop an email back to me or reply to the reminder message today, and we can get you that information. Again, a big thanks to everybody for joining today, for your questions and your participation, and a big thanks to Julie and Andy for providing us with all this great information. We'll be in follow-up to ask you to evaluate, so please take the time to fill out that survey, and we hope that you continue to join us for future webinars and that you look for ways to engage with the Nebraska Walkable Communities Project. Please let us know how we can be helpful, and this concludes today's webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.